Hi, everyone. Welcome to our weekly Substack roundup. I am very excited that we have my friend Elie Honig here. He is the CNN senior legal analyst, former federal and state prosecutor. He's been following the birthright citizenship case for CNN. He's going to tell us kind of what's been going on at the Supreme Court, how unusual it is to have a president of the United States be there for oral arguments. I wanted to just basically give you all, before we start, Ellie, and I know you have limited time, but a lot of news obviously is happening. A lot of news happens every day, but a federal judge on Tuesday agreed to permanently block the Trump administration from implementing a presidential directive to end federal funding for NPR and PBS. Um, so we're going to, we just think that's worth noting. Also, via the New York Times, a federal judge ordered on Tuesday that construction be halted on President Trump's proposed White House ballroom to be built in place of the demolished East Wing, saying work must come to a stop until the project receives a go ahead from Congress. Really an important and meaningful setback to the designs for this big, big ballroom. And before we get to birthright citizenship, I'm just curious for my own edification, Ellie. So clearly, I think with the redoing and the new ballroom, what $400 million ballroom, whatever. The judge also said it's got to be approved by Congress. So
Yeah.
that did give the White House some wiggle room on constructing this ballroom. So I guess the first question is, do you think that the administration will pay any attention to these rulings?
Yes, and I think what unifies all these rulings you've just mentioned, Katie, is the president trying to push the far outer boundaries of the executive branch of his presidential powers, and courts, not always, but in these instances, putting some limit on it, saying when it comes to spending, that's up to Congress. When it comes to erecting new structures on national parks or national monuments or on the White House, you have to go to Congress for that. And it was interesting in that East Wing case to see the Trump administration trying to point to something Congress had did that authorized it. And they point to this law passed by Congress that allows a certain amount of spending per year for maintenance, meaning like the air conditioning and the plumbing. And usually that amount is about $2.5 million. And as you said, this ballroom is $400 million. And the judge said, this isn't that. So all of these, I think, have in common that Trump's trying to push every day outer boundaries, and sometimes he's succeeding, and sometimes courts are pushing back and saying not so much. And that's also a sort of good framework for birthright as well.
Well, it's interesting, Ellie, because I got a lot of, not a lot, but a handful of comments on my post about this that last night,
Mhm.
because I thought it was interesting enough to tell people what this judge had ruled. And many, not many, but a few argued, well, other presidents have remodeled the White House and have,
Yeah.
you know, uh, refurbished, renovated, et cetera, et cetera. And my response to them was, this is a totally different ball of wax, which, by the way, I do have a ball of wax behind me and an amaryllis growing out of it from Costco. Apparently, they're three for $39 and they're so cool. You don't have to do anything to them and they just grow amaryllises. Isn't that
Wow.
crazy?
Out of wax.
Anyway, just had
Anyway,
to say ball of wax. But I mean, do you agree that that is not a fair comp?
yeah, I think a average intelligence fifth grader could understand the difference between a swimming pool, a bowling alley, a tennis arena like Trump put in 2019, no problem, versus a $400 million ballroom that can hold thousands of people. And the judge actually talks about that in the opinion. He says those prior things were, first of all, for the president's own use and were not physically obstructive. You couldn't even see them. Whereas, from the public viewpoints, whereas this ballroom would literally overshadow the White House, and therefore it's just in a different category altogether.
I agree with you 100%. Well, I don't know, Karen, how much the patio was. Are you talking about the patio that was once Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis's
Oh,
rose garden or Jackie Kennedy's rose garden? I do not know the answer to that. Maybe one of
yeah.
my smart followers do. But let's go ahead and talk about what's happening at the Supreme Court today. Before we get to the actual nuts and bolts of how this ended up at the Supreme Court, Ellie, how unusual is it that a president of the United States actually attends oral arguments. I can only believe it's to intimidate the justices.
Well, first time ever that a sitting president has gone to the Supreme Court to attend oral arguments. Some have gone in the past to swear in their justices who they nominated or whatever, but first time ever. Trump said it last night, but he kind of hedged it. And I thought, he's done this before. I actually disagree. I don't think he's there to intimidate. I think he's smart enough to know he's not going to intimidate these justices. They're not intimidated by him sitting there. But let me tell you my theory. It was the biggest show in town. Bright spotlight, and he has to be there. He has to be star of the show. He has to pull the spotlight. And I'll tell you, the one place where Donald Trump has failed to dominate and command the spotlight is the Supreme Court. I mean, it ended up being a
Well,
little
he's not
footnote.
supposed to.
Why? Well, he's not supposed to at the Supreme Court. You're right. I actually think it's fine for him to go. I mean, it wouldn't bother me if from time to time presidents went. I mean, they're members of the public. It's open to the public. They're parties often. But there's a reason
I
they
mean,
have.
maybe I'm too cynical. Maybe I'm too cynical,
Maybe
Ellie.
you
But
are. I mean, think about if another president had done it, a different president. I don't think I would necessarily be condemning it, but I thought it was interesting. He didn't make it through. He left halfway through, which you're not really supposed to do. I was actually wondering, would he have? I knew it was going to take 2.5 hours, and turned out he did not have that attention span. But I think he just says, "Look, it's the show of the day. I don't want to be left out of the show of the day. Birthright, something he's politicked on. He's going to lose, as we'll get to." But I don't know. I think it just struck him on a whim. Yeah, I'll go. I'd rather be in the spotlight than hanging out in the White House
that's
when people are looking down there.
That's interesting. Michelle says he didn't like what he was hearing. You're saying that
Yeah.
he's going to lose. I know that I read just before we hopped on, Ellie, that conservative justices were asking some pretty hard question to the ACLU
Yeah.
lawyer. But let's backtrack, and then we'll talk
Sure.
about the likely decision that the justices will hand down. So, because I did a deep dive into the history of
Mhm.
birthright citizenship, and honestly, I learned a lot this morning. I'm embarrassed to say I didn't know some of the backstory. So, it
Yeah.
all stems from the 14th Amendment that was put in place after the Civil War. It's
Right.
really it has its root back to slavery, but also to English law. So, go
Yeah.
ahead and give us a brief history.
So the 14th Amendment was ratified in 1868, as you said, after the Civil War. And the idea was really two things, related things. One was to protect the children of freed, enslaved people, because the worry was somebody out there would say, okay, these people have now been freed, but we don't have to recognize them or their children as citizens. The second thing was to overturn probably one of the most probably the most disgraceful opinion in the Supreme Court's history, the Dred Scott ruling, which essentially held that enslaved or Black people in general are not citizens, that had happened a decade and change before that. And so what the 14th Amendment says, and this is going to become crucial, the relevant part of it is that all persons born or naturalized in the United States, and this is important here, and subject to the jurisdiction thereof, will be citizens of the United States. Now, for 157 years, between 1868 and 2025, we all, and Congress and the Supreme Court and all the political branches, understood that to mean, with very, very narrow exceptions for like diplomats, basically, if you're born here, you're a citizen, regardless of your parents' status. But when Trump took office, January 20th, 2025, his first day in office, he issues an executive order that purports to not quite end birthright. Some media outlets say end, and that's not quite right, but to substantially narrow it. And let me make sure people understand what he is trying to do. Trump is trying to make it so that if the parents are here illegally, the children do not become citizens. That's going to impact millions of people. And if the parents are here legally, but temporarily, the children are not citizens. And that's also going to be people, for example, on student visas, on work visas, on specialty profession visas we give to scientists and researchers and doctors, people who are here on humanitarian protective status, dreamers, beneficiaries of DACA from the Obama administration, deferred action for childhood arrivals. And so we're talking about millions and millions of people. Now, that was immediately challenged in the courts. Every single federal court to consider it, 4 district courts, 3 courts of appeals, rejected Trump's point of view, including, it's not just all liberal judges. One of them in Washington State's a Reagan appointee who said it's blatantly unconstitutional. So that's how we ended up here at the Supreme Court. That's a quick run through 157 years.
Yeah, and then there was another case I know that validated
Yeah.
birthright citizenship that happened, I guess, Not
1898.
yes, thank I'm glad
Yeah.
I'm glad you're a lawyer and you know all these things.
Wong Ark Kim. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. Do you know much about that case? I'm just curious.
Yes. So this was the case of a person born in the United States to two Chinese national parents. And this person, Wang Ar Kim, he leaves the country to go on a trip or something. And when he comes back, he's told, sorry, your parents aren't citizens. Your parents are from China. You're not a citizen. And he challenges it. And the US Supreme Court says, yes, he is. Now, that opinion strongly favored the challengers here, right? And one really important thing that it established, you will hear Trump and see in his social media, he's constantly saying birthright citizenship was passed in 1868, and it was only intended for the children of slaves. Now, that's wrong for a couple reasons. First of all, if it was only intended for the children of slaves, it would have said that. It would have said the children of slaves are citizens. It's phrased, and several of the justices noted this today, including conservatives. It's phrased as a rule. It's phrased as a broader principle. And second of all, that case you referenced, Katie, the Wong Ark Kim case from 1898, established that it's for well more than just children of slaves. Wong Ark Kim was not the child of slaves. He was the child of two Chinese immigrants. So that was the case. If you heard discussion and debate today, if you listened to the live stream, Wong Ark Kim, that's what they were talking about.
Right. And this issue, I understand, Ellie, was presented to the court before, but it wasn't
Yeah.
dealing with the legality of Trump's case. Can you explain what the Supreme Court ruled last June?
Yeah, this poor case has been up and down and up and down the ladder. So last June, the Supreme Court took the case, but only to deal with the procedural question of, can a district court judge, right? And we have, what is it, 94 federal districts in this country. Can any one of those district court judges, there are several hundred, issue an injunction that applies to the whole nation? So you remember there was a bunch of these during Trump and Biden and Obama, more during Trump, where a district court judge in pick your district, whether Western District of Texas or Southern District of New York, would say, I hereby block this for the entire country. The Supreme Court used the birthright case to deal with that procedural question last year. They said, no, district court judges cannot do that, but we're not going to rule yet on birthright. Back down the chain, and then it worked its way back up. And now today we finally have argument on the birthright question itself.
Got it. Now, the Solicitor General, a guy named D. John Sauer,
Yep.
am I pronouncing his name right?
John Sauer. Yep.
Sauer is the one arguing the case for the administration.
Yep.
Tell us a little bit about him and what he's arguing, because I know intent to stay was talked about quite a bit.
Okay, so John Sauer was Donald Trump's personal lawyer before this. He is now the Solicitor General of the United States, a very important position. The government's lead lawyers in the U.S. Supreme Court. He's argued dozens of times in front of the Supreme Court. He's very skilled. And if people listened, you would just recognize his voice because he speaks very quickly. And he does have a little bit, I don't say this to ridicule at all. I actually reject when people ridicule, but his voice has a little bit of that RFK, like shaky quality, like scratchy quality to it. So, just so people you will go, oh yeah, I heard him this morning. The administration's argument is this. Remember, I said the 14th Amendment says persons born in the United States or subject to the jurisdiction thereof. So there's two things you have to be a citizen under this. Born here, there's no real controversy about who's born here, and then subject to the jurisdiction thereof. And those 5 words are where there was a little bit of play. The administration's argument is that means if someone is here from, let's say, Mexico, okay, and they're here illegally or they're here temporarily as a visa holder, then they are subject to the jurisdiction of Mexico, but somehow not the United States. And that makes no sense, because if someone's here from Mexico illegally or temporarily, you bet they're subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. I mean, can the United States government arrest those people? Sure, they do. Can the United States government tax those people, search them, ticket them, regulate all the things we do? Of course you can do. And so Sauer ends up in this weird position of saying, what the Constitution really means is domicile. There was the word that was probably said more than any other today at the oral argument, if you control F word search, it was domicile. But that doesn't work because it's this vague notion of, where does the person live and where does the person's emotional loyalties lie? And does he or she intend to stay here and how long? And the justices, including Amy Coney Barrett, John Roberts, Brett Kavanaugh, pointed out basically, first of all, that's unworkable. How are you going to figure this out? At one point, Justice Jackson said, what are you going to do? Bring in pregnant mothers and have depositions where you say, what are your future plans? That's just not workable. The other thing, there was a very pointed moment where Amy Coney Barrett said, That's not textual. And that, in 3 words, she was saying, yeah, but that's not what the Constitution says. And to me, that line of questioning was very telling. I mean, the liberals are going to be against Trump here. Let's put Thomas and Alito, let's assume they'll be for him. I think the 4 other middle conservatives, so that's Roberts, Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Barrett, I think all 4 of them are going to side with the liberals, and it's going to be at least 7-2, maybe 3 of them. But I think it was pretty telling.
And what did you think of Cecilia Wang, who's arguing the case for the ACLU, who's representing the plaintiffs, a group of expectant parents and their children? How did you feel about her argument? Because I guess Sauer had a
Sour.
couple of tough moments
Yeah.
with some of the justices, as you said.
Honestly, I was dazzled by both of them. I thought they're both extraordinarily talented. And Cecilia Wang had a much stronger hand to play here than Sauer. I mean, Sauer did the best he could. He was playing with a pair of twos, maybe. And I've done arguments. I've never argued in the U.S. Supreme Court, but I've argued in the Second Circuit, which is one level below. 3 judges. In fact, I argued a handful of cases in front of then Judge, now Justice Sotomayor. Um, and I know, it's incredibly hard. You have these brilliant jurists, 3 in my case, 9 in their case, firing questions at you, rapid fire. I thought they both held up remarkably well. The main questions aimed at Cecilia Wang were basically, well, this phrase subject to the jurisdiction thereof has to exclude somebody, right? It can't mean everyone born here. And her answer is the way we've taken it the last 150 years. It excludes the children of diplomats because they're not subject to jurisdiction, right? You can't arrest a diplomat. If there's ever an invading army, that kind of thing. In some cases, in years ago, the way we had our things set up with Native Americans maybe would have been, on reservations would have been a little bit different. But I thought that was a good answer. And then she was also asked some policy questions like, wouldn't this incentivize people to come here illegally? But the answer is, the question is not, is birthright a good or bad policy? Right? If we're writing the Constitution from scratch, we could have a full debate about that. The question is simply, what is the law and what does the Constitution say? And even several of the justices, John Roberts at one point said that to Sauer. Sauer said, all these babies, Chinese women are coming in and having babies. And Roberts said, what's your data on that? And Sauer didn't really have it. He said, well, I've seen it in the media. Roberts was not impressed by that. And then Roberts basically said, yeah, but who cares if it's good or bad policy? We're talking about the Constitution here.
Well, that's refreshing. I know that Trump and his advisors have claimed that births tourism,
Yeah.
what you were referring to as a national security threat that incentivizes wealthy foreigners to travel here to have babies. He posted on social media this week, birthright citizenship is not about rich people from China and the rest of the world who want their children and hundreds of thousands more for pay to ridiculously become citizens of the United States of America. Is it about the babies of slaves, he wrote?
Yeah.
What is he
It's a
talking
little
about?
hard to parse that. So first of all, one of his big things, he thinks that he's done this a bunch of times. He thinks it's this great gotcha moment. He goes, look at the date. This amendment was ratified in 1868. That's right after the Supreme Court. That proves that it was intended for the children of slaves. And it's like, yes, it definitely was. But the question is that all it was intended for? And clearly the answer is no. On this issue of birthright tourism, it's really a bad sign when you're asked for data on that by the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, and your answer is, I don't know that. I mean, if they wanted to know that, he goes, I don't know the numbers. And he says, I've seen it in media reports. I mean, that's never gonna fly. And it also, separately, if you think birthright's bad policy, the answer is amend the Constitution. I know it's not feasible. Maybe Congress, it's not clear whether Congress can pass, but Congress has passed laws the other way. Congress has passed laws in the 1940s and 50s that codify what's in the Constitution. So again, one can claim this is bad policy, and there are arguments that way, but that's separate from the question of what is the law.
And this is part of sort of an anti-immigration push that has been part and parcel of the ideology of this administration, that
Yeah.
too many people are being allowed to come here and automatically become citizens. And it does, in their view, incentivize people to come to the United States. And as you said, it's what's in the Constitution, whether people can argue about the policy in and of itself. So when do you think the decision will be handed down?
I'm quite confident this will be in the latter half of June because the way the Supreme Court calendar plays out, they always try to wrap up by the end of June. Sometimes they tick over to July 1 or 2. And they usually save the biggies for the very end. And this is very late in the term to have an oral argument on a major case like this. So, and just to highlight for people, the big ones we're still waiting for are there's an important redistricting case coming out of Louisiana that could impact how we draw our maps for the midterms. We're waiting on the decision about state laws that bar biological women from participating in transgender sports. There's a big one over Trump's effort to fire the Federal Reserve Board governor, Lisa Cook. We're waiting on that one. And then this one. So I think those are the four big ones that we're still waiting on between now and the end of June. But this will be very, very end of the line.
Yeah, and Elie, I wanted to ask you before you go about the Supreme Court 8-1 decision on conversion
Yeah.
therapy, which is a huge defeat for the LGBTQ community.
Yeah.
And honestly, I just sort of saw it this morning, and I haven't really dug into it.
Yeah.
But it's basically, conversion therapy was outlawed because it was basically trying to change the through therapy, sexual orientation or gender identity. And so I believe it was outlawed in many states,
So
right?
it's an interesting ruling, and it took me a minute. I was on air when it
Because
came
it's
out.
8-1,
It's 8-1 with Ketanji Brown Jackson as the one. The one dissenter. It took me a minute because I was like, okay, wait, hold on. I actually said to you're a TV veteran, and I said to the producer, I said, hang on, don't come to me yet. I need 90 seconds. I'm not digesting. I got it. But so certain states, including this case is about Colorado, have laws banning conversion therapy. Right, basically
uh-huh.
making it illegal for therapists to sit down with children who may be thinking about transitioning or becoming, or transitioning to another gender and trying to talk them out of it. And the Supreme Court said by 8-1, basically, well, that probably, I mean, it will go back down, but it will violate First Amendment free speech because you're restricting what people can and cannot say, what these doctors, what these therapists can and cannot say to their patients. What Ketanji Brown Jackson said is, it's not really free speech. It's not public speech. It's the way a doctor, these types of doctors, administer care individually to their patients. So Ketanji Brown Jackson looks at it very different from the rest of the Supreme Court. The bottom line, though, is that those laws that ban this this gender affirming care are probably going to be struck down. There's a lot of negatives there, but it basically means states can't pass these laws banning this type of therapy.
Banning this psychotherapy, but
Right.
different than gender affirming care, which has been
Right. You're right. I said it wrong. Yeah.
gender kind of therapy, talking to patients about
Yeah.
gender identity or sexual orientation, right? So
Right.
if you have a gay child, you can say to the therapist, and I guess the Supreme Court upheld that a therapist can try to talk a kid out of being gay.
I mean, it's odd to me that they framed it as a free speech issue. It's like what a doctor says to his or her patients. To me, is I actually kind of agree with the one dissent with Justice Jackson. That's not what we mean by free speech. That's not public speech. That is how, think of any psychologist, psychiatrist, therapist. That is how they administer their services, their care to people. I don't know that it's properly phrased as a First Amendment question, but that's what the 8 said. So
Yeah,
that's the end result.
yeah, and what they say goes, right?
Like it or not.
Yeah. All
Yep.
right. Well, Elie Honig, thank you so much. Ellie's been here for you all just joining us, explaining the Supreme Court case on birthright citizenship, which was argued today. The ACLU representing the plaintiffs, the Solicitor General representing the administration and its executive order saying that birthright citizenship should be struck down. He told us the history of birthright citizenship and that he expects that the Supreme Court will rule in favor of the ACLU. Is that a good
Yes.
synopsis, Elie?
Exactly. I think Trump's going to lose this one. I think it's going to be. I wrote for New York Magazine. The only suspense left is whether it will be 7-2 or 9-0. So 9-0 is tough, but I'm confident. I was a little nervous because I try to not be super predictive in what I do on air and predict outcomes. But I was pretty aggressive on this one on CNN and in New York Magazine. And after hearing today's argument, I feel even better about it.
Okay, but you still think Thomas and Alito, they're obviously
Yeah, they're just
question marks, and they seem to never rule against Trump.
It's rare. It's rare. There is some signs that even Thomas asked some pointed questions of Trump, but it'll be 7281 or 90.
Okay, great. Well, again,
Thank
thanks
you,
so much.
Katie.
Always good to see you and talk to you and have you explain this stuff in ways that we can all understand. Really appreciate
Thank
it.
you. Everyone have a great holiday, Passover, Easter, Good Friday, whatever you celebrate.
Thank you, Ellie. Good.
Thanks.